July 2, 2025, despite repeated warnings from Washington, Russia unleashed a storm unlike anything seen since the beginning of the war. In less than half an hour, more than 50 heavy missiles streaked through the night sky, followed by a wall of steel, 24 T-90M tanks, 18 T-8 OBVMs, 9 BMPT Terminator support vehicles, and a swarm of armored carriers. The assault slammed into Ukraine's eastern flank with such ferocity that the earth itself quaked under 90 separate explosions. For 6 relentless hours, the Ukrainian defensive line was pounded, buckled, and shattered. Lancet drones shrieked down from above at nearly 100 miles per hour, like mechanical predators hunting their prey. Radar stations, artillery batteries, and trenches were torn apart in fire and steel. To observers, it seemed that the Kremlin's gamble had paid off. Ukraine's defenses were collapsing under the weight of Russia's war machine. But then came the unexpected. Instead of driving forward in triumph, Moscow's armored spearhead began to falter. Entire units were crippled in sudden flashes of fire. 99 burned out on the fields they were meant to conquer, their hulks smoking in the dawn light. 7 Terminators were ripped apart by precision drone strikes. 15 BMP infantry carriers were abandoned in panic, their crew scattering. Nearly 300 Russian soldiers lay killed or wounded amid the wreckage. So what happened? What unseen force turned Moscow's most ambitious offensive since 2020 into a battlefield graveyard? What hidden hand rewrote Russia's thunderous assault into a cautionary tale written in flame and ruin? Follow me closely, because once you see how it unfolded, you'll never view modern warfare the same way again. The opening barrage at exactly 4:17 a.m. local time, July 2, 2025, the skies above Kharkov and Donetsk erupted. Russian Tornado-S missile batteries, each launcher capable of firing a dozen rockets tipped with 800-pound cluster warheads, let loose their salvos. Within half an hour, more than 50 warheads rained down on Ukrainian trenches, command posts, and ammunition stores. Over 80 explosions ripped apart dugouts, smashed fuel convoys, and sent shockwaves rolling through the earth. Above, Lancet 3 loitering munitions darted like vultures, their AI-guided systems homing in on Ukrainian radar. In mere minutes, several M777 howitzers and anti-counter battery radar systems were obliterated. Overhead, Orlan 10 reconnaissance drones mapped Ukrainian fallback positions in real time, relaying the coordinates directly to Russian fire control officers. Moments later, the ground assault began. 57 armored vehicles advanced information, 24 T-90Ms, 18 T-8 OBVMs, and 6 Terminators rolling steadily southward. Armored infantry carriers packed with assault teams trailed close behind, ready to exploit breaches. Thermal imagers scanned every thicket, every hedgerow, seeking the heat signatures of fleeing defenders. By the time the sun broke the horizon, Russia's armored spearhead had pierced 3 miles deep into Ukrainian defenses. The cost for Ukraine was immediate and brutal. Preliminary battlefield reports spoke of more than 30 soldiers killed, 90 wounded, many of them dragged from bunkers still burning with traces of phosphorus. Drone footage confirmed the loss of at least 9 armored vehicles, including for Leopard 2 a 6 tanks caught while refueling and 5 personnel carriers, crushed under falling debris. Grain silos and fuel depots, once vital lifelines for the region, smoldered as hollow shells. Black smoke spiraled into the summer sky. The strikes didn't stop at the front. Cluster munitions smashed electrical substations, cutting power too. Tens of thousands across Donetsk. Civilian convoys jammed the narrow escape routes westward, caught between chaos and fire. In less than 6 hours, Russia had inflicted greater damage on Kharkov's defenses than in any single offensive since 2022. For Moscow, this was the plan: overwhelm Ukraine before NATO or the US could mount a meaningful counter. But what the Kremlin had not foreseen was that this brutal opening would rouse something deadlier, waiting just beyond the horizon. The American response as Russian armor pressed deeper into the battered lines, the long-promised American counterstroke, arrived not with soldiers, not with boots in the mud, but with precision that spanned continents. At 9:42 a.m., U.S. satellite constellations in geosynchronous orbit locked onto Russian command trucks and forward ammunition depots. Within minutes, intelligence teams relayed coordinates to HIMARS launchers positioned only 22 miles behind Ukraine. These batteries had just received their newest weapon, the ATACMS Block 2A missile. Each warhead carried hundreds of submunitions, designed to saturate an entire football field in steel and fire. When the first rockets roared skyward, it was as if the ground itself convulsed. ATACMS missiles streaked at Mach 3, racing low over the horizon before bursting above a cluster of Tornado-esque reload vehicles. What followed was a rain of steel. Within seconds, a dozen Russian trucks and fuel tankers detonated in a chain of fireballs, so vast that shockwaves rattled windows miles away. For 12 minutes, secondary explosions from cooking ammunition lit the battlefield like a furnace. Farther east, Ukraine unleashed its newest tools, American-supplied Switchblade 600 drones. Each carried a tandem-charge warhead engineered specifically to defeat modern reactive armor. One after another, they dove from the sky, homing in on Russian tanks whose crews barely had time to react, pilots stationed deep within concealed bunkers directed waves of kamikaze UAVs with astonishing precision, steering them onto the exposed turret roofs of Russian T-90M tanks. The live drone feeds captured every chilling second before impact, the missile-shaped drones diving at steep angles, their stabilizers trembling in the wind, until an instant white flash erupted, followed by towering black smoke columns. By 10:30 a.m., Russia's armored push had ground to a halt. Forward observers reported no fewer than 8 Russian tanks destroyed by Switchblade drones within just 45 minutes. Many of the wrecks still burned where they had tried to hold key stretches of highway, their twisted frames marking the failed advance. Meanwhile, Ukrainian HIMARS batteries redirected fire onto Russian bridging equipment along the Vavher River. Precision salvos cratered the riverbanks and left crossing attempts in ruins. Several BMPs sank midstream after their tracks were shredded, their crews scrambling in panic, adding to the chaos. Newly arrived in TPQ-50 counter-battery radars, the most advanced in Ukraine's arsenal, picked up the incoming arcs of Russian 152mm shells and calculated their exact firing points within seconds. Ukrainian M777s and French Caesar howitzers responded immediately. GPS-guided shells rained down less than 90 seconds after each detection, annihilating entire Russian gun lines. By midday, at least a full batteries had been silenced. The combined effect of HIMARS and Switchblades was unmistakable. The tide of battle had shifted. By late afternoon, intercepted Russian communications revealed a force in disarray. Commanders shouted over encrypted channels about missing fuel convoys, about tanks stuck in minefields with engines burning uncontrollably, about supply trucks ambushed before reaching the front. Meanwhile, the unseen presence of U.S. orbital and signals intelligence loomed large, feeding Ukraine a constantly updated map of Russian positions. To the soldiers on the ground, it no longer felt like Ukraine alone against Moscow. It felt as though the hammer of American war technology had descended with relentless precision, transforming Russia's best plan thrust into a smoldering labyrinth of wreckage. As the last echoes of HIMARS strikes faded across the shattered fields near Kharkov, Ukrainian ground commanders initiated the next phase, a direct armored thrust to shatter the remnants of Russia's spearhead. This was no reckless gamble, it was a carefully orchestrated maneuver blending NATO armor, advanced sensors, and determined infantry grit. At the forefront, advanced Leopard 2A6 tanks, German-made machines of war armed with 120mm smoothbore cannons capable of piercing nearly 800mm of rolled armor at over 2 miles. They moved steadily, maintaining a cautious 12,300-yard buffer from suspected Russian kill zones. Their thermal imagers swept the tree lines, hunting for hidden threats. On their flanks rolled Swedish CV-90 infantry fighting vehicles, each carrying squads armed with Javelin and NLAW launchers. These teams disembarked near burnt-out farmsteads, entrenching themselves at crossroads and hedgerows with launchers already trained on likely avenues of Russian approach. At precisely 11:52 a.m., the first clash erupted. A Russian BMPT Terminator support vehicle, bristling with autocannons and anti-tank missiles, swung its turret toward to advancing CV-90s before it could unleash its barrage, a Javelin. Team hidden inside a collapsed grain silo fired. The missile arced 500 feet skyward before plunging down onto the Terminator's turret. The explosion blasted its hatches skyward, flames roaring out like a furnace chimney. The Leopard to south wasted no time. Their 120mm rounds struck Russian T-80s at blistering velocities exceeding 5,700 feet per second, shredding reactive armor as though it were paper. Observers recorded at least 5 Russian tanks obliterated in the opening 20 minutes, several detonating catastrophically as their ammunition cooked off. Turrets hurled yards from their hulls. Adding to the devastation, HIMARS units in the rear launched volleys of GMLRS cluster munitions. Each rocket dispersed 180 to bomblets over an area the size of 2 football fields, hammering Russian reserves massing on a dirt highway east of town. Drone footage showed vehicles swerving violently off-road, some plunging into ditches in blind desperation to escape the invisible storm. By early afternoon, the fields north of Kharkov were carpeted with wreckage. Russia's advance had not. Simply stalled. It had collapsed into bloody retreat, pummeled by a web of drones, artillery, and NATO armor working in seamless coordination. Each destroyed tank, each mangled BMP was the product of real-time drone feeds, encrypted networks, and joint fire control, turning Ukraine's counterattack in as EC-37B Compass Call aircraft began to unleash their full electronic warfare capabilities. The drones littered above, flooding the sky with relentless waves of electronic jamming. Entire stretches of Russian communications collapsed into silence. Tank commanders, desperate to coordinate their advances, found their encrypted radios sputtering with static and white noise. Even Russia's prized Orlan-10 reconnaissance drones began to falter, drifting helplessly off course, severed from their ground controllers. At that same moment, Ukrainian operators switched on ground-based NASAMS radars, each system linked directly to American satellite feeds. When a flight of Russian attack helicopters Mi-28, Havocs, and Ka-50 to Alligator swept low in an attempt to flank the Ukrainian lines, the radars locked onto them instantly. Within seconds, AMRAAM missiles streaked into the sky. Twin explosions tore through rotor discs, sending fiery debris spiraling into treetops below, closer to the ground, compact. Our Q-2O Puma drones hovered silently above ridge lines, searching for the heat signatures of idling tanks. When they detected clusters of Russian vehicles attempting to regroup near a collapsed rail yard, the coordinates were instantly relayed to hidden Javelin and NLAW teams. Within 3 minutes, a storm of missiles ripped through the air, erupting in fireballs that left thick black smoke twisting into the heavens. By 5 p.m., Russia's vaunted assault force was shattered and blind. Field reports indicated that more than half of the surviving Russian armored crews had shut down their engines altogether, desperately hoping to hide from thermal sensors. Trapped inside their metal coffins, they waited in silence, cut off from higher command, hoping for orders that would never come. This battle was no longer dictated by brute force, but by control of data. And in that moment, Ukraine and its Western allies owned every bite. By dawn the next morning, the battlefields around Kharkov resembled a graveyard of modern armor. Scorched T-90Ms lay blackened and torn apart, hatches blown open, their interiors charred beyond recognition. Ukrainian recovery teams counted 9 destroyed T-90Ms, 68 OBV MIs, 7 BMPT Terminators, and more than 15 BMP infantry carriers. Among the wreckage lay heaps of discarded rifles and gear, left behind in panic by fleeing Russian troops. Casualty estimates painted an even grimmer picture. Over 300 Russian soldiers were reported killed or wounded in under 48 hours. Many were abandoned in the chaos as supply trucks and medical vehicles were either obliterated by airstrikes or simply fled without direction. Drone footage revealed entire columns of Russian armor reversed in panic, tangled in craters, engines dead, while their crews cowered inside terrified of prowling Switchblade drones overhead. Yet the material losses told only half the story. The psychological blow was devastating. In towns and cities across Voronezh, Belgorod, and Rostov, Russian families demanded answers. Why had so many sons and fathers failed to return? Why had Moscow's proud armored formations been reduced to wreckage by a smaller force armed with Western technology? Even Kremlin-controlled media outlets could not fully suppress leaked videos of burning vehicles or intercepted Russian radio transmissions, echoing with panic and despair. For Ukraine and its allies, the lesson was undeniable. Modern wars are not won by whoever fields the most tanks, but by whoever sees first, strikes first, and coordinates best. With American satellites, precision radars, missile systems, and swarms of drones, Ukraine had turned Russia's largest offensive in months into a catastrophic defeat. Any nation ignoring this reality of modern warfare would do so at its own peril. In the fields of Donbas, that truth was written in fire and steel. When the dust finally settled over Kharkov, the story of this clash was told in burned-out tank, husks, scorched landscapes, and hundreds of Russian lives cut short. Moscow's grand offensive, anchored by nearly 60 modern armored vehicles and preceded by a brutal opening barrage, had been reduced to twisted wreckage scattered across Ukrainian fields. Despite Russia's massive tonnage of steel and explosives, it had been outmaneuvered by a coalition of technology, real-time intelligence, and the unyielding resolve of Ukrainian defenders. In less than 48 hours, a fusion of American attack missiles, Switchblade drones, advanced counter-battery radars, and NATO armor transformed what was meant to be Russia's hammer blow into a humiliating collapse. The battlefield delivered a clear, unflinching lesson: raw numbers no longer guarantee victory. In the wars of the 21st century, triumph belongs to those who can see faster, think sharper, and coordinate across satellites, data links, and drone networks with precision that old Soviet doctrines cannot match. Beyond the battlefield, Kharkov's aftermath rippled into Russia's own heartland. Families demanded accountability, generals scrambled for explanations. Kremlin propagandists were forced